Hey, welcome back to the Big Esports Podcast, the first episode that we've recorded in 2021. In this episode, we've got two men, Jan and Justin, coming on from GameSquare Esports, a publicly listed esports company that is building its own ecosystem within the market. They've acquired Code Red, a UK-based agency that I've used a bunch of times for influencer campaigns. But also these two men are both ex-FaZe Clan, Justin previously being the CFO as well, so quite high up in there too. Had a lot to talk about today. I don't know if I've talked about this in content before, but definitely privately with some of my friends, associates, and mentors, I've talked so much about building an ecosystem in this space. So I had a lot of questions to ask these guys. And another interesting tidbit I talk about as well is debt financing. It's something that started to come into the esports market and something I think that's going to start being much more common and publicly announced. So we talk about a bit of debt financing 101 as well with the ex-CFO, Justin Kenna. So hope you enjoy this episode. I did. Enjoy. Justin, Jan, we're live. How are you?
Going well.
Good. That's good. That's good. Well, it's good to talk to another Aussie on here. Actually, I think out of all the nationalities besides US, Aussie would probably come second. And so many of those Aussies are living abroad, just like yourself, Justin. How's life over in the Big Smoke?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've been looking at a couple of opportunities in Australia, but the esports community in Oz is huge, but I haven't come across that many in my dealings thus far. But you always get a few comments, I guess. Number one, the Australian accent, but number two, the gravelly voice. So always get a few comments from people not understanding you via Zoom into all sorts of different countries.
Yeah, I never understood how hard Australians were to understand until I worked for some Taiwanese companies and went to Taiwan, and they could understand my British counterparts perfectly fine, and they could understand my US counterparts, but they could never get what I was saying. And I always thought, like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, well, that's why we brought Jan on board, because he's just this, beautiful, articulate Englishman who can he's just like a traveling translator, really.
Thanks, mate. I'm actually German, and I have no idea what you two have been talking about, to be honest. It's so.
But you've acclimatized to the UK beautifully.
Perfectly so, right? Perfectly.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, I guess this is, for anyone who's tuning in live, I can see some people have started coming in here on LinkedIn and on Twitch as well. This is kind of our first, big esports podcast or big gaming live for the year. And thought I might kick it off with a bit of a bang. So with you guys, with Justin and Jan, I guess you're both, fairly new to GameSquare Esports as a whole. To be frank, I hadn't heard of GameSquare Esports before you guys came on. And obviously you have some star-studded history in the market. So I was wondering if maybe we could start with Justin. Can you just give a little bit of a recap into, who you are, where you came from, and what GameSquare is as your new position there?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously I'm Australian, as you pointed out beautifully, Chris. I came over to the States about 6 years ago. I was actually running strategy and finance for a production company at the time, but was introduced by a friend, a fellow Australian who was working in Europe at the time, was introduced to the guys at FaZe Clan, and they were actually looking at the time trying to acquire FaZe Clan. This is, roughly 4 years ago, so pretty early days. FaZe had an enormous following, but not so much, from a business sense. So in terms of, I was introduced to FaZe roughly 4 years ago, started talking with them, understood how big the industry was as a whole, and understood how big, the brand was. I was really excited by, trying to help build that into a full-scale business. So I joined FaZe Clan about 3.5 years ago. I think there was roughly 8 people working out of a house at the time. And over the last 3 years, I've been the CFO of FaZe. We were, able to grow to over 100 sort of employees. It's now a global powerhouse within the esports and gaming world. And, we raised, close to 60 million in debt and equity over that time. I think it's number 3 now on the Forbes most valuable sort of esports orgs, at a tick over 300 million and continuing to grow. So that was sort of my background. Was incredibly lucky to be a part of the growth at FaZe. And I think, one of the main things with FaZe Clan is I think that they really paved the way in terms of, that kind of intersection of pop culture into traditional sport and entertainment, as well as just, opening up really large scale brand deals and commercial deals and collaborations with, traditional sporting orgs and brands like Champion and Supreme and so on. So incredible time there. I had a discussion sort of near the end of last year in relation to moving on to my next opportunity. For me, I wasn't sort of passionate about becoming a CFO of a publicly listed company. I think my strengths were more in the sort of commercial strategy operations of the business and being involved in fundraise and investor relations and those types of things. Was presented with the opportunity to come over to GameSquare, which we'll probably get into a little later in the podcast. But for me to come in as CEO and to start building out a team with people like the caliber of Jan, that we can build a world-class team and start to scale this business and look at really interesting sort of M&A opportunities to try and build out a world-class agency, digital marketing, media business within gaming and esports. So
yeah, cool. And then obviously I got a lot to talk about off that, but I want Jan to give you a bit of a spotlight as well, mate, just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, slightly different background. So, most of my background really is agency land. So I used to work for Mediacom, Mindshare, those types of agencies running big accounts there. So among them, especially here in the UK, the Sky accounts, so Sky Sports, Sky Movies, what they call premium. That's about when you add up Sky in total, about £180 million worth of media, which is a lot to spend. And then, from my work on Sky Sports, more recently I was at City Football Group. So that's the holding company that owns the likes of Man City, New York City, Melbourne City, and a whole variety of football clubs. And there is kind of, and kind of Justin mentioned it as well, you start to see the convergence of things like football into gaming, into music, into fashion, and this kind of inflection point that's only grown over the last couple of years was one of the things that kind of really interested me. And, when we started to look at Man City and what it was capable of with the talent that's there, with the stories you can tell, and actually intersecting that with different parts of gaming or music or fashion culture, we actually created something that was really quite powerful. So we did branded content series with the likes of Vice and working with Copper 90 to create, unusual stories of our global fan base. And I kind of left there with Man City being one of the, according to CrowdTangle at least, one of the biggest branded content producers in world football, right, of any team. So punching well above its weight, and that helped it become a very strong commercial entity as well, right? Because as we well know, and it happens a lot in esports, there's only so much stuff you can sell on the shirt, right? And that only has so much value. I think when we look at the world of our consumers and our audience, and this is what's becoming more and more so, they're content hungry, and actually being able to tell authentic stories is kind of what, was really key to kind of Man City's success, and being able to sell that to brands becomes almost more powerful. And I think when, after I left there, I saw what FaZe were doing. I actually helped broker the deal between Man City and FaZe, and that became a really powerful partnership, which, I've seen recently it's culminated in the Fortnite partnership with Man City Kits and the FaZe guys running stuff. But also more and more, it's also about, some of the stuff you may not see, because if you follow the likes of Nate Hill, you'll see quite regularly that he games with Kevin De Bruyne and Aymeric Laporte and Kyle Walker. So actually, tier one football players. And that's kind of where the world is going, right? And I think where GameSquare kind of attracted me after I left FaZe was that it started to really build that infrastructure, right? So rather than being at the sharp front end of just always being about teams and the flashy stuff, it's actually starting to build the piping that helps connect those audiences and brands together. And that's what's really, really powerful about the organization that we're building.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to chat to you guys is I'm really interested in, I guess, what FaZe alums are going to be working on. It's pretty obvious, and you watch my content, I'm pretty close to Clinton Sparks, who, I interviewed him first when he was with FaZe and now with Exet, and they're creating, FaZe with a slightly different flavor, and then really interested to see what you guys are doing as well, obviously with both your experience in that space as well. Is there anybody else of note that's left FaZe to create something interesting that I should be thinking about as well that you guys know of?
Not currently. I mean, there may be into the future. I think that naturally occurs when you have, a company that grows so quickly that develops into a juggernaut like FaZe has. And I mean, it's a huge compliment to FaZe to have, people having the ability to go off and start building, their own businesses. Off the back of the experience there, but also the networks and connections that you get. I mean, not currently, but I mean, it's probably a watch this space, right? The FaZe, pardon the pun, but we'll be moving into the next phase pretty quickly. You go from startup to really high growth to, the next level is, does it become a public company? Do you, when and how and where do they get to a liquidity event? It's about, professionalizing the org more so and things like that. So, it'll definitely be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I see this in agencies and even other companies in the gaming space. They almost work like an incubator for their staff, right? As the company changes and grows, it makes sense that people will come and go depending on what they're mostly interested in. And they realize that they're not, another example is a lot of people who work for peripheral companies will decide that actually they want to sit on the other side of the fence and open a retailer or a distributor. Like that's quite a common thing we've seen as well. So it makes sense with FaZe. I'm really interested to see where, other people take that, that skills and experience that they've learned in that space. So with GameSquare, I guess for those people who don't know, you guys are a public listed company as it stands right now. Can you talk about your current acquisitions that you've made within the space? And then we'll go into kind of the discussion, which is a lot of the title of this podcast, which is talking about how you're building an ecosystem. I got a lot of questions.
For sure. So I can kick off in terms of, what currently lives in the portfolio and what we're building and how we're going about it. So we are publicly listed on the CSE. I think we were floated at roughly 25 cents in October of last year. It's trading around 50 cents currently. So, reasonable growth there. It's really early days for us as a business. Currently in the portfolio and the original acquisition was Code Red, which is a UK influencer agency, and I'll let Jan jump into a little bit more detail on them as we kind of move this along. Jan's obviously, because of location, pretty heavily involved there in helping those guys, take what is a really nice, profitable business to the next level. So that's been great, and he's also obviously looking at other opportunities to grow out our presence throughout Europe. So Code Red is the agency that are sort of built into the numbers to date. We have signed, and public knowledge, so I can talk about it, a deal with an acquisition with Reciprocity, which is 3 assets, which will close very soon and start to be reflected in our numbers, which will be nice, and to build out that rev profile and really build out the market cap. It probably takes us from a consolidated sort of viewpoint, for 12 months from sort of 5 million revenue and sort of EBITDA positive to sort of 15 to 20 mil in rev and EBITDA positive, which I think that's one thing to note as we talk about this is we're trying to build a, real, we're really concentrating on the agency digital marketing verticals within the space, but we want to be the first publicly listed company of real revenue scale that's profitable. And we kind of keep hitting back to that. I think we have experience in where and how to monetize this industry, and I think that's going to start to become more and more important. With the Reciprocity transaction, the 3 assets there are GCN, which is your more traditional sort of gaming media company. They are soup to nuts sort of digital marketing agency. And again, we can sort of talk a bit more about those guys' incredible backgrounds. I mean, Jeff came from Curse Media, Keo, Fox Sports. They get the space and they are incredibly connected. So we're really bullish about the revenue growth there. And we have two team-based assets. One is a Crossfire franchise in China, and the other a League of Legends team in Mexico City. Both really interesting markets, obviously huge reach. They give us, optionality and nice end distribution. I wouldn't say that we're in the business of acquiring teams. I think that we're always open to looking at team-based assets and talent-based assets that make sense, but we're not in the business of deploying a lot of capital into high cash burning assets. So important to note that those 2 assets are break even and EBITDA positive. So that helps us in terms of, we're definitely not against the team-based model, but for us, it needs to have a value add attached. So there's sort of the 4 assets at the moment. And then in terms of sort of opportunities where, really attacking the agency digital marketing space in the US and Europe, talking with a number of really different and interesting agencies in that space. To be honest, sort of in the 5 to 10 million sort of revenue range, EBITDA positive. We think we're really well positioned with the team that we have to help provide strategic support, to be able to inject them with capital. Obviously, you get them some liquidity, which is an interesting place to be for a private company in this space. and to be quite frank, we think we can make multiples on them in the public market by bringing in complementary assets for cross-selling opportunities and all sorts of opportunities within that sort of bigger sort of media gamut in this space.
Yeah, and I think you already answered this pretty well, but I'd love a direct answer to it. I'm interested in learning about your strategy of buying growth assets versus creating your own companies versus buying revenue. It sounds like at this stage, you're kind of focused on buying maybe a combination of revenue and growth assets. Is there a mode in the future where you see yourself saying, well, I want to buy, X or Y type media agency doesn't exist, I better build one instead? Or are you guys focusing purely just on M&A?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good one, and I'll take this on, Jan, and then I'm going to hand it over to you because I'm not trying to take. I know
you go ahead. Give away the trade secrets.
I'm not trying to take the spotlight from you. No, so I mean, this is not an M&A, just a pure M&A play. I mean, our LA-based agency GCN. I mean, we are incredibly bullish about their growth opportunities. I mean, we're getting them access to capital. So it's, again, public knowledge. We did a bought sub-receipts deal that will open once the deal closes. So we'll be well funded to get them up and moving to make some really key hires. Mm-hmm. So we are focused on organic growth, but, to be quite frank, a sort of rev profile of 15 to 20 mil and EBITDA positive is nice, but that's certainly not where we want to be. So while we think we can grow that organically, we are absolutely going to be looking at M&A opportunities. I think it's a great question, Chris, and I think you're right. At the moment, we're focused on, we feel that we can attract, I don't know if I can swear on this, but we have a no dickhead policy. So we think that we can attract really good people with really nice businesses and help them go to the next level. Because I think there are a lot of really interesting private companies in this space that are, 3 to 4 years in and thinking about, okay, how do I get liquidity? How do I access capital? And so forth. And just to answer the last point, I think, look, it's not to say at some point we wouldn't look at a larger rev buy, right? But we're not chasing revenue that's low margin that's going to hurt us in the end. It's interesting in the public markets, you need to market your stock, but we're very interested in backfilling this company with the fundamentals, that are going to produce margin and get us to profitability. So there's a couple of opportunities where Jan and I are actually starting to work on that are more around us building out a potential division of a business that we'd be doing ourselves through our networks that might make more sense rather than an acquisition. So I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer because it's a little bit of each. But I think right now it's organic growth, looking at, private companies, high growth, EBITDA positive, agency assets within this space. And then as we build out that rev profile, there'll be opportunities to grow our businesses and really scale quickly.
Yeah, and touching on that, the agency thing, makes a lot of sense to me. Like a personal quip, I've got a friend who's running an agency, and they're doing a couple of $1 million in rev, and he's quite young himself, so he's feeling fantastic. He was looking at a potential exit, and I remember talking to him that he was a bit shocked when he was only offered like a 2x multiple on his revenue for an exit. And I said it's because you've got a cash flow rich but asset poor business as a whole, and it would make sense to me that if you want to build a proper brand and build something on the public market, that you would buy those things and roll them up together, because we all know that these influencer agencies do fantastic margins, but sometimes the only thing they own is just the contact with the influencers and the brands, and you need something a bit more behind that. And that's why I've always been so bullish on things like FaZe Clan and 100 Thieves, because in its core, to me, it seems like FaZe Clan is an influencer agency that has a brand behind it. And instead of, the influencers just having, hey, email me at FaZe Clan, they are, FaZe Banks in the bio, and they live that, they live that thing, and they live the brands that work with them as well. Yeah, it's a media business for sure. We'll get his details from you offline. Yeah, sounds good.
And only 2x. I mean, we're fine with that. But I think what comes down to also, it's quite interesting. There's so many commercial models at play, right? So different influencers agencies will broker different types of deals, will use a different multiplier to kind of work out what the talent rev versus the agency rev is, and also, start to plug in value-added services, right? And I think when you look across the market, and FaZeClan's a great example of this, there isn't a one-size-fits-all commercial model within FaZe, right? They know that there's multiple revenue streams that they can get at, so they need to figure out exactly what it is. And I think any business worth its salt at the moment is probably exploring a multitude of ways to actually help monetize an audience or grow that audience or find a way for that brand to enter a market safely. I think where we kind of look at as well, and again, when we've got someone like Code Red under it versus someone like GCN, they also work on completely separate models. So it isn't just a case of rolling everyone up into one big, Acme esports gaming industry brand. It's kind of like a case of, okay, these guys have commercial models that work, are tried and tested, are positive in terms of EBITDA, and that's kind of what we're looking for, right? We wouldn't want to disrupt that model. We want to help scale it faster, right? And that's the kind of challenge for a lot of businesses at the moment. How do I scale quickly without access to cash or with, the right kind of contacts or expertise in place? And that's
I really feel like those who solve the commercial model will win. The short, medium, and then the long term within esports and gaming as a whole. Like talking to Riyadh from Gamers Group, who they're a media company that owns multiple assets within the gaming and esports media market across social media and .esports and GamePer and things like that. And that's one thing that he talked about with his acquisitions. He said, they've made a lot of like 4+ media acquisitions in the space and built a few of their own brands as well. And he said every single one of those was so poorly commercialized before he bought them that it was a no-brainer for him to buy them. And I had a lunch with him yesterday, and he said a recent acquisition for him went up 5x literally in 24 hours after he bought it, just because some of their processes were terrible. Some of their Google processes and the way they served their ads and the type of ads they served. He changed a couple of features, and then boom, he said he called his ads manager in the morning and said, something's wrong here. He said, no, actually you're doing very well. So, I feel like that happens a lot in this market too. There's unlimited esports agencies and there's unlimited esports teams. But from what I've found and trying to hire myself as well, is there are not many good sales and commercial teams at all within the esports market. There's a lot of interest from, say, where you come from in the past, Jen, and the traditional agencies, people wanting to switch over. We're talking to a few of those at the moment, say here in Australia. And there's a lot of people who have the sales bug, who have history in gaming and esports that want to go over and do that kind of sales thing. But finding someone who has both of those is very hard. And if they do exist, often they own their own agency because they know the power of themselves. Right. So it would make sense to me that, if you guys are able to make some fantastic hires in that space to push the commercials forward and help people to monetize better would be great, because we've all seen agencies which have, tons of channels full of young, interesting YouTubers who get tens of millions of views per month each, but they're doing one ad every 7 videos and the ad is charged at a weird CPM without proper tracking links. And the thing that always bugs me the most is they're not making case studies. The amount of influencer agencies that I talk to who don't have a single case study absolutely blows my mind. It's nuts, because we have about 25. And so if we can do it, I'm sure they can do it too.
I mean, this is all part of the industry growing up a bit, right? And watching the chips fall in the right places. And I understand, obviously, a lot of guys are off going away, and we have a lot of influencers that are trying to get the hours in, but when you really look at those businesses, how can you ever scale it, right? If you're kind of one guy who's there doing 8 hours worth of Fortnite streaming, well, doing 9 or doing 10 is not going to make much material difference on your commercial value. So I think when we talk about commercial models, I don't think it's going to be one that wins out entirely. I think there's going to be a range of them which will be more stable and will drive stronger revenue. And we've seen in a lot of esports teams, the merchandise is definitely one that's got an early lead. But over time, it's going to be around content. It's going to be around, the actual value of the IP you create. And I think that's really where I don't see many people creating that IP just yet. Actually beyond FaZe and some of the big guys who actually create their own programming, or if you look at like what Venn are doing, that battle to create formats, which is a very old kind of TV model, and then plugging brands into that and, plugging talent in, not much of that exists at the moment. So there's still a lot of, battles to be won and fought, for no doubt about that. But I'd imagine there's going to be a range of models that do it. And, agencies will have to adapt. And that's kind of why I think, again, when we go back to what we're doing here within GameSquare, we're not that front end, we're not necessarily buying Fortnite teams or Counter-Strike teams and those kind of things, because those games will change over time. But what will remain the same is the audience and also the plumbing that sits behind it that enables that audience and a brand to be put into contact with one another. And, that's ultimately what we're trying to create here. So
I think just to add to that, what Jan's saying, so our sort of overall thesis, and it's it's quite broad, but I think it's a good one, is connecting global brands to this ever growing, esports and gaming communities, this huge audience. And I think, to reiterate what Jan's saying, that the ability to be able to do that as well through multiple agencies makes sense, because as you well know, Chris, this audience it's very fragmented, right? The market's fragmented. So you have an ability to be able to service, brands at a different level through, audiences at different levels. People think about gaming and think, how do we reach kids? And it's not the case, as you well know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really true. So with you guys, I guess the first question is, building an ecosystem, is that the right way to explain what you guys are doing? And if so, how do your acquisitions interface with each other?
Jan, do you want to go?
Yeah, ecosystem is the right word for it. I mean, yes, we are trying to build an ecosystem, right? So I think people have different views on what an ecosystem really is and how it works and how it functions. For me, I always go back to, my old agency days where I worked at WPP, where you'd have a MediaCom, who's a media agency, you'd have a JWT, you'd have Grey, who's another creative agency, but then you'd also have a Millward Brown, who's a data company, you'd have a Zaxis, that's a kind of trading platform. And actually, if you're owning footholds in all those different areas, even if you're not, got the automotive business from X brand, at some point that brand's still going to cut you a check. So on a very siloed basis, that is one way to think of it, that throughout an ecosystem, at some point, you're going to have brands cutting you checks for different things that you can provide as a service. But I think for us, and on the integration point, this is where I think it's really key for us. And it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the kind of no dickheads rule. We want to work with people that also want to work with us and also want to work with the other people in our wider kind of circle of networked agencies, as it were. So, there's nothing that stops the conversation between a Code Red and a GCN. There's nothing that we don't put any barriers in place. We want them to work together because, by all means, what happens in one market can work in another market, or there can be development of briefs, there can be more creativity on stuff. And I think that's really where any network becomes more powerful, right? It's the sum of the parts working for the greater whole, which by all means will hopefully yield better results. And I think, over time, if you look at how any successful network, be that a WPP, or even if you look at something like a Unilever, which owns pretty much half the food in your cupboard under several different brands, adding those different things together is what essentially creates the meal or creates the ad campaign. And that is where the strength in it lies, right? That no matter what happens on one side, the other side can help pick up slack or help integrate or provide resource. And that's really how we want, I guess, the future of all our different businesses to be integrated. But look, that's kind of a nirvana approach. The reality of that is always going to be slightly different. We'd never want to put agencies in a competitive pitch with each other, but we also know that individually they have their own strengths, right? Someone like Code Red, a real kind of, full, deep, authentic understanding of the esports business. All those guys know esports inside out, proper into gaming, live and breathe it. They're completely different to someone else that we might be looking to buy who sit more in the kind of broader gaming space, the kind of guys that might look after Candy Crush mums or more League of Legends or whatever it may be. So everyone has their own role, but we look to integrate as best as we can.
Yeah, and another...
Oh, sorry, Chris. The other thing I was going to say that is it kind of goes to what you were saying and also about what you were alluding to before. And, why are we attractive in terms of, why would a private company want to be acquired by us, right? Yeah. Apart from, the upfront consideration for their business. Why? And I think what Jan's saying is kind of partly that. So there is absolutely opportunity for roll-up of different agencies, but we're not in a position where we're going to come in and say, we want to acquire you because we're going to bolt on GCN or we're going to bolt in Code Red here. We want to build really good relationships with the people that we're working with to do what is best for them. And I think that might sound all nice and fluffy, but it's the case. And I think we don't necessarily need to roll them all up. There might be opportunities where it makes sense, or divisions of businesses or whatever for efficiencies and for global expansion and things like that. But overall, because the market is so fragmented, it's not necessarily a requirement. And I think the other part of it is, in terms of why we're attractive because I think we're building a team, a corporate team that has real expertise in this industry. Within this industry, to what you were saying before, Chris, I do still think that at the top end, there's also a gap. in terms of management experience. I think we have the ability to help set strategy and growth, but we're not trying to butt into these businesses day to day. And I wouldn't be telling Jeff and Keo or GCN on how to run their agency, because they understand how to run their agency. But I'm there to provide strategic support. I'm there to get them access to capital, to be able to go to market and tell the story and raise funds and build a business. So I think that's why we're attractive. I think a lot of people say that, right, when they're going through this acquisition process. It's like, getting gobbled up by a venture fund or something where you lose control of your business. This is not that, because these businesses are not valuable to us if they aren't in control of their businesses. We're here to guide the ship and to help them grow, much quicker than they'd be able to grow on their own. And, quite frankly, all get the result at the end in the sort of share appreciation of being within the public markets.
One of the reasons I asked that's interesting to me is I feel like for brands in the market, it's hard to place a large amount of dollars without making things extremely complex right now in esports. We're working with a client right now who's spent, multiple millions of dollars across the influencer market, but looking at how they've had to do that by using about 15 different agencies to date. And you don't know any time whether that agency is good or not. You don't know anything about the history of that agency. Whereas if you've got a large media conglomerate like happens in the traditional market, if you're a Coca-Cola, you can very easily give, $1 to $5 million to a conglomerate that can put you into TV, newspapers, magazines, digital, and everything, and even YouTube that they own themselves. Is that something that you guys are targeting as well, where you may have an overarching commercial team that can easily come to you with, $500K and you can place that across different media entities in different countries?
For sure. I think that, having the ability to be able to compete and perform at that larger scale level is really important, while still being able to have the ability to be nimble and move like those smaller agencies. And I think that's what we're well positioned to do. And this is why I think like a GCN is so powerful, right? Is because they can pick up the phone and talk to a CMO of any major brand. They've worked on some really incredible stuff. They have a huge pipeline, but they're kind of competing at that top agency level with these really large scale traditional agencies. But these really large scale traditional agencies, as you were saying before, Chris, doesn't necessarily understand how to reach that end audience within this sector yet. Yeah. I mean, that's not always going to be the case, but I think we're really well positioned to take advantage right now of, McDonald's spends $2.4 billion a year on marketing. I mean, that's not all going to gaming, but whoever's running, the gaming accounts at these big agencies, are they going to risk losing the whole account by, sending out a strategy around gaming, or are they going to outsource it to an agency that has the credentials and understands the market? So, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's, having the ability to be nimble and be able to move, but still be able to compete on that, much higher level and larger scale.
Yeah, definitely an interesting trend I've seen in agency land, I guess, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Jan, in the past couple of years. It seems like there's a massive rise in niche agencies. There's a rise in, niche creative agencies, niche social and influencer agencies, and also gaming agencies as well. I've seen a lot of movement, in Australia and abroad, of higher ups from these large agency conglomerates, been leaving, joining each other, spinning around, agencies coming and going, quite a few of them shutting down as well. Like, are you seeing that as well? More money is going to these smaller niche markets?
To a certain extent. I mean, it especially within gaming and esports, that seems to be the case at the moment. I think when you look at agencies and what the size of them are, particularly here in London, you've got agencies that I worked at, which was 800 plus people, right? And that's not going to be everyone's fight. That almost feels corporate to a certain extent. So I think people kind of find their passions and then split off and splinter in. And, agencies sometimes have been very slow to react. I guess if you look at gaming in particular, it's only been in recent months that a lot of the big ones have really launched and started talking about gaming. They've put in their kind of 2021 upfronts because, they all sat at home all of last year going, I wasn't gaming big, when actually, esports and gaming has got a long history. It's been around for a while, but only now they're starting to really look at it. And I think it sometimes can come across quite cynical as well. And, that kind of also is a little bit off-putting. It's just kind of the fad for this year. We always joke here in the UK that every year is the year of mobile. Well, I think last year, the first time in 10 years, it actually was, because everyone sat at home on their sofa playing on their mobile. But those agencies will spin around and, like you say, do different things. And I think people will always look to kind of run out on their own, and whether they're successful or not, that comes down to personal relationships, comes down to their product offering and what they can actually offer. It's easy to kind of be the consultant in the room. It's actually harder to do the executional stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the business that we acquire and are looking at seriously right now, they have that track record. They have those, you mentioned at the top of the call. It's funny how so many of them don't have case studies. Well, all of our guys have big chunky case studies about what they can deliver, and they can rule that out, and any time to show people exactly what capabilities are, and that's where the real difference comes down to. I think that we'll see again a lot of movement in that space, particularly this year. Big agencies will announce their gaming, whatever pod or whatever they want to call it, their little part of it. You see small agencies make big moves for big clients. I think there's an agency I was talking to the other day who, they're probably about 50 people. But they're beating some of the big incumbents on large pieces of the business. It's that agility, that nimbleness, and also that authentic understanding of what it is you're talking about, be that, sport or gaming or esports, whichever way you want to kind of cut it, or entertainment as a whole. That's really where it'll win out. And as a client, you kind of mentioned it there, do you really want to risk money on a kind of big conglomerate strategy around gaming, or do you want to talk to some real experts who are going to handle your brand with care and put the extra hours in and really make it part of the bigger deal, rather than just kind of a box ticking exercise at some of those big shops?
And I guess the first agency that's born out of gaming that comes to mind, who's winning the big clients you're talking about, is GameSquare Esports, based out of London, right? They launched KFC into gaming and did a fantastic job. Multiple viral campaigns on there, and they've done
very well. I've got a couple of friends over there, and I think when you look at them, they've when you look at the setup of that team, it's a bunch of young guys who just understand the space, right? Understand what that audience was going to react to, how they're going to handle a brand in it, and also I guess there's a lot of bravery on KFC's side as well to kind of say, hey, look, you guys handle this and take this into this space, and we will fully entrust you with it. And I think when you look at across the broad spectrum of brands, and especially ones that I've worked with in the past, sometimes you have some real battles with brand managers and marketeers about what a brand should and shouldn't do, and who actually owns the brand. Is it the the big office out there somewhere on some kind of trading estate, or is it the audience that interacts with that brand every day? And I think those are debates that don't necessarily have to happen so much in esports. If you look at someone like G Fuel, for example, and how everyone within gaming knows G Fuel is so flexible, so mercurial about how it works its way through the audience, that everyone has their own different impression of G Fuel and what it does, but everyone knows it's a great product. It's part of this, it's part of that. Yes, they sponsor a bunch of guys, but actually the way they work with content, the way the other things is then, Kairos has kind of taken a little pinch of that and kind of developed it, I guess, for a really big brand, and KFC, hats off to them. They've won a couple of awards and done really good stuff. So, I'm sure there'll be a few more of those to come.
I'm really interested in learning about a little bit more about, I guess, the structure of the ecosystem that you guys are building right now. So sitting at the top level from the GameSquare Esports side, what, are you guys hiring right now, and what sort of positions do you have sitting at that top level that support the companies that you acquire?
So not right now at the GameSquare level. I mean, we absolutely will be. For us right now, the focus is, the first job, I think, for me coming in as CEO was to go and do a fundraise. And we went and did that and ticked that off. Once we close on the reciprocity deal, which should be very, very shortly, as I said, we'll have access to that capital. So, it'll then be about deploying that capital to our, current assets in the portfolio to help them hire. So the hires will more be within those portfolio assets, GCN and Code Red. Jan, you can probably talk to the roles that we're looking at for Code Red. But in terms of, just to answer that question, we will be at the corporate level as, we continue to grow out our portfolio assets, looking at bringing in, in-house, marketing and PR and things like that we currently outsource. We're not at the level at the corporate we're not needing to at the corporate level just yet really, go with this heavy-handed team. I mean, we have a great and experienced public market CFO, Kevin Wright, our president, who's based in Toronto. Was able to take the company public and get that done, and he's been incredible. He's very well networked, and he sees the world the same way that Jan and I do. So at the moment, it's a smaller corporate team. We will definitely be looking to build that out as we build out our portfolio assets. But Jan, do you want to talk to a couple of the hires within?
Yeah, for sure. So within Code Red, these guys are, super, super busy. They've got loads of stuff coming in. We're looking for social manager. We're looking for kind of talent managers. That's because of the growth of those sectors, right? We need to have more people on top of stuff, executing campaigns, doing good things. And, those guys are growing from strength to strength, Code Red. And we'll probably be putting some new jobs into the market. Again, when we look at the commercial side, you kind of mentioned it there seems to be a skills gap to a certain extent. And I think we also see that in a lot of other jobs, there's some quite proficient people, but also there's some skills gap there. So we're being very careful on who we hire as well. We want to make sure we get the right people in on those fronts. But, it's one of the things in the industry that there isn't really any training apart from doing. Everyone's got an Instagram account and stuff like that, but we're being very cautious. I think Code Red's in a great position, and I think if you keep your eyes on that as a business in itself, they've already got Bud Light as a partner. Did some great stuff with them and Fanatics last year, brokered some deals there, and did quite a lot of content stuff. There's going to be more of that stuff coming from this stable for sure, and it's definitely one to keep an eye on, especially with the new hires coming in. It just gives a bit more flex in that organisation. And again, when you look at what GameSquare is offering, it's being able to look at that business and help those businesses go, right, okay, this is how you can kind of structure yourselves a bit better in terms of roles and responsibilities. And myself from an agency background can look at it and go, right, here's the kind of functions and channels that you need to be using, or some process you might want to implement. Working with Luke, who's the kind of COO of that business, to really just kind of get down what are the priorities, what can really help you grow X, 5, X 10 in the next 18 months, and that in this instance is hiring some more talent into the business to really take up some of the workload and start, being able to get everyone a bit more headspace to do that business development side and actually onboard new clients.
Yeah, I think having someone like Jan come in, Chris, to help a business like Code Red, I mean, Luke and Ben at Code Red are amazing. They've done an incredible job with that business. As when you're in a private company that you're running, you get really stuck in the day-to-day, and you're basically doing everything, and it sort of stops you from being able to go out and really do business development and win new business. And they understand their business better than anyone, so we want to be able to provide them with the support to be able to go and do that, so we can best utilize them. So bringing someone with experience that Jan has to, not only open up pipelines and help them, build out, some more structure and strategy around the business. It's just to free them up so, we can help them really grow and take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's definitely true what you were saying. And I guess, for anyone listening would reiterate that for sure. It's really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of, trying to sign a contract, and maybe you won one PR client, and then all of a sudden you just start chasing more because you want the revenue, without sitting, having someone to sit above you, like with you guys, or having a board that can, catch up with you once a month or quarterly and say, what's the bigger picture here? What are you guys working on? What are you building towards?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it helps, for sure. We all in this day and age, want this sort of instant kind of gratification and short-term wins, and it's all like here, now. But to have that, I think you're right, to have, we have a really experienced board. For me, it's been a really, steep learning curve in terms of coming into sort of running a company in the public markets, but to have people with experience above you that hold you accountable, that you can learn from and develop, I think it's really important. And I think we have a really good mix of that, throughout the company. And again, goes back to the no dickhead policy. We want to build a company of really good people that want to work hard, and we're all aligned. And, they get to all celebrate and achieving the success together. It sounds a bit fluffy, but I mean, it's the truth. And I think when you're working day to day with people that you like and that you get along with and that you trust, then, it makes it a lot easier to achieve results.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Got to give the green tick on Code Red. I'm using them right now for a campaign with a client, so they're doing pretty well. I always talk to Luke on Discord, so You got the Chris Mayer Smith ticker approval there. There you go.
Good testament.
Something that I really wanted you to explain, Justin.
We'll clip this up and put it on our website.
Something I really wanted you to explain to everyone, Justin, and explain to me a bit better as well. So in the past in esports, historically, there's been a lot of capital raises happening. There's been a lot of revenue coming to agencies and they've used that to fund exciting things. There's been a lot of family office, angel funding, VCs, etc. But debt financing is something that's extremely new to the market. So like you mentioned before, FaZe went through doing some debt financing. There's some other private companies I know that are going through doing some debt as well. Could you just explain to the listeners a little bit as to what is the difference between debt and raising capital, but also why a company, or specifically why a company right now might go into debt financing instead of raising capital, just in a general sense?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for GameSquare, we don't have any debt as a company, and we're not looking at raising debt. I mean, it was actually a really good move by FaZe at the time. So we took would have been, I think it was 30 million Canadian in debt. It was about 23 million US at the time, and that was roughly 18 months ago. That's actually been paid off now. But at the time, it was really interesting, right? Because there were so many things going on that we needed access to capital to be able to, capitalize on as a business. But in terms of where our valuation was at, it wasn't at the level that we knew that it could be or would be with additional capital. So, instead of taking in an additional $30 million, whatever the amount is, right? And instead of taking another 20 million US or 25 million US in as equity at a sort of 140 million valuation, and then you heavily dilute the company, right? Because when you're, that's for a company the size of FaZe Clan and where FaZe can get to take in 20, 25 million at 140, that's obviously a fair chunk of your company that you're giving away. I think we knew that FaZe was going to be worth a lot more than that, but we still needed access to capital. So debt's obviously a way that you're kind of backing yourself in, right? Obviously you have interest payments. You don't have interest payments when you sell equity in a company, but you don't dilute yourself either. So it made a lot of sense, and it was it was a good move by us as a business at the time. It got us money to be able to go and hire star-studded employees like Jan Neumeister and so forth. But it really gave us the ability to go into new lines of business and look at new teams in new markets and all sorts of stuff, and is part of the reason why FaZe is what it is. That's now been paid off, and I think FaZe is raising, and I may be wrong, but I think their last pre-money raise was at 250 million. That's a lot more than 140. So to be able to pay off that debt and be able to raise at a higher valuation, it's really about dilution for your current shareholders, and that's really why you would probably take debt as opposed to equity. But also, I mean, there are other reasons early on in your stages as a business. FaZe, we didn't take any VC money. We took private money, and we had the ability to because we had a huge audience and we had a really compelling story. Not everybody is that lucky, right? So people may take debt instead of taking VC money because of the terms of the equity and things like that. So there are different reasons, but for us, it was really around dilution, and it proved to be the right call.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see if it becomes something that's a bit more common, especially with COVID driving down interest rate prices as well. I have another example of a friend who's doing a round of debt financing right now to make an acquisition. And it makes perfect sense for him because the acquisition that he's buying is cash flow positive. It has fantastic revenue and he's buying it at a lower multiple. So it makes perfect sense for him to just do the simple maths, to say, well, I'll take out, this $1 of debt financing, buy this company for $3, and I'll have it paid off in 3 years with the interest.
For sure. And then, there's also convertible debt and other instruments that make a lot of sense as well, where you may take out debt that has conversion features based on, terms of the deal, which are I think we're seeing much more in the sort of gaming market for sure.
So what sort of acquisitions are GameSquare looking at now? So you've mentioned that you've made a lot of plays into kind of the influencer and more traditional agency space. You haven't ruled out esports teams entirely. Is there anything else that you guys are interested in, like anything from merchandise to any other sort of companies?
I mean, not merchandise as such. We're definitely looking in the agency space. Again, the sort of digital marketing media type agencies that specialize within this space, and definitely cross over into sport and other forms of entertainment that make sense. More on the brand side probably at the moment, but we are also looking on the influencer side. I think we have as we've talked about, we have a really great influencer business in the UK. Could be interesting to look at ways to make that a global business. I think there are some other interesting opportunities that we're looking at in terms of end distribution partners, which make a bit of sense, and also at the front end, right? And in terms of interesting kind of data platforms that are informing brands on how to reach that end audience. So we've been talking with a couple of those as well. Again, it's I know it sounds reasonably broad, but we are really building a business that we think is soup to nuts in connecting brands to end consumer. And without giving away too much, I think we're pretty close to be able to announce some pretty exciting stuff coming forward.
Yeah, fantastic. That sounds pretty interesting. Really interested to see how you're able to find those right fits in the industry. And I guess are you looking at a completely global play here as well? Like you did say that you've monitored the Australian market. Obviously, you've got companies and employees right now across the US and the UK as well. Are you looking into Asia, into wider Europe or Southeast Asia?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's a tough one to try and just we're going to scattergun approach this global business. We have a presence obviously in China and Mexico City through the two team assets that came in through the reciprocity transaction. They're going to sort of be a bit of a longer play for us in terms of working out those strategies. Right now, the focus for us is North America and Europe. So we're really focused on agency digital marketing vertical within gaming in the US and Europe. But you're right, Chris. I mean, it's not to say that we wouldn't look at opportunities in Australia, in Brazil, in Southeast Asia, in China, in other markets that make sense. But we think they're a little bit further down the track, right? We really want to build out the core business, build out our revenue model here, prove out the model, and then enter new markets, because it's not the exact same model as you would know in each market. We are really well positioned in China with our connections through LGD to really make a play there, but we probably think it's a little premature at the moment.
And I've heard similar things from people who've done exactly that, had a headquarters and established business in the US, made an acquisition in the UK and London, and ultimately given it up because they've said, it's just not where we're physically located. It's too hard to, battle those time zones. It's too hard to battle the cultural differences, the business differences. Sometimes brands, well, a lot of the time, brands that you'll deal with, the local brand is only interested in advertising in London. So it's hard if, where does your goals lie, or where does your loyalty lie with what part of the business? And the last thing you want is to have different bits of your business fighting against each other, right? And fighting for your attention.
Yeah, I think COVID's made it a little easier in terms of, dealing with people. You generally, if you're okay with the lack of sleep, you're behind a screen, so your location isn't as important. But I think you're right. I mean, it's been much easier getting Jan in and working with the Code Red guys, given knowledge of market and time zones, and having Jan focus on building out the European business. And that's not to say that he's not going to be heavily involved in opportunities in the US and helping our US businesses build a presence over in Europe. But in the same way that we're now looking at some of the opportunities that Jan can bring and building out their opportunities in the US. So I think you're right. I think to a degree, COVID's sort of broken down the barriers a little bit more, but it is still nice to have some boots on the ground in those markets as you kind of start to expand.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you explained it clearly, because I have so many people approaching me all the time looking to get acquired. So hopefully they're watching this or listen to this podcast later on, and they'll hit you guys up in the DMs.
Just send them my email. We'll chat with them.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess, being respectful of you guys' times, and we're sitting in 3 different time zones right now as well, I'm interested in talking a little bit about LinkedIn as well. So, for anyone who's listening to this podcast right now, they're like listening on LinkedIn and have known that it's been extremely pivotal to so many businesses in growing in this space. I'm interested in learning for you guys as well. Do you as GameSquare or the companies that you own have a LinkedIn marketing strategy, and how are you exposing yourselves into that market? Or is that something that you haven't activated on yet?
Yeah, I mean, not something we've activated on yet. I think we all use LinkedIn regularly. I think you're breaking up a little bit, Jan. Our advisors, actually, that you were referring to before, use LinkedIn regularly. Kevin uses LinkedIn regularly. I often go on LinkedIn to get a lot of my sort of information in relation to esports and gaming. So it's an interesting one. I think we're very much open to a wider strategy there, but not something that we have in place, today.
I'm really interested to see if more public listed companies take that up to interface with potential investors. I guess the leaders in that market that I've seen are probably like the ETF, the ETF based guys that have done really well in that space. Patrick and Tim Maloney, we're taking on Herb May, for example, who is, kind of someone who came up very quickly in the market through utilizing LinkedIn. I'm going to be interested to see how you guys tackle that. And I do know some other companies that are looking to list in the future that are including that as a pivotal part of how they communicate.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We'll refer to Neil Duffy, the king of LinkedIn, on what our strategy is. Yeah, I'm sure he's watching.
Yeah, he was in the chat before anyway. Yeah.
He's a busy man, so he's probably tuned off. But he's the king of LinkedIn, so we'll tap into him for the best way to utilize. But no, I think you're right. I mean, I think LinkedIn is a great place to share information, and to be able to get in front of really influential people and get your message across. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we all use it pretty regularly as an overarching strategy. It's probably something we need to think about a bit more.
Yeah. Sorry, Jan, you were saying?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a super powerful tool. I think it's been underutilized by most brands, by most people individually. I think a lot of people still use it in a way that probably isn't what it's now designed to do, which is just kind of growing your followers, accepting every invite. Actually, one of the things that I learned off a kind of friend of mine, a guy called Mouth Mims, who runs Strive Partnership, is that you should go through your LinkedIn fairly regularly and just kind of hide and kind of unfollow a lot of people to get rid of some of the chaff, because, as with all content businesses, right, LinkedIn is a content platform, you end up seeing more stuff than is actually ever going to be relevant, right? You need to kind of train an algorithm to start picking out a bit more opportunity. And particularly, with joining GameSquare, I'm still getting a lot of stuff from the football side of the business that I used to work in, or from an old agency side that I may want to up or downgrade. So actually a bit of housekeeping on that is really there. But in terms of us also marketing it, it's going to become a platform that's going to be more and more powerful, right? There's a lot of functionality on there that goes properly unused, whether it's sales navigator style stuff or whether it's the in-mail, small agency. If I was a small agency now, I would be hitting that really hard. And there's also extensions you can buy for LinkedIn as well, which helps you get email addresses and phone numbers of marketing directors. I'm kind of giving the cat out of the bag a bit, but that essentially is a really, really powerful tool, right? And it's all data-based, it's all kind of quite relevant. And I think if I was a small agency now, I'd be absolutely knee-deep in some of this stuff to try and grow my sales, grow my share of voice as well, and use LinkedIn as a content tool and an extension of what I'm currently doing.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to get ahead. And I mean, using the personal examples that I've used on this podcast before, I was able to meet, Jeff Pabs from Phase through that, Clinton Sparks, our investors came to me through LinkedIn, and to date, in the past 12 to 18 months, around 70% of my business's revenue came directly from LinkedIn, and probably about 50 to 60% of my clients. And a lot of that is due to the content that we put out. And just like you're saying, Jan, there is a lot of very poor quality content on LinkedIn. And we found that when we simply upped our content quality by 10%, we saw like a 50% growth in viewership, people adding us, and also comments and shares, and then also business inbounds as well, to the point of where we had to hire a VA to work, 2.5 hours every morning, just triaging my LinkedIn inbound messages. But it's something that's worked out extremely well, and like you said, it's underutilized because people are either too scared to post, don't add people, or they're just posting crap. all the time, and you see people post, hey, this new vacuum cleaner does this, and it's just like Facebook all over again. And I can definitely resonate with what you're saying about cleaning up your feed as well. It's something that an old friend of mine, Jamie Skeller, who works for a publicly listed esports company here in Australia, kind of taught me, and I follow with my Twitter, for example. Like, I'm extremely stringent with who I follow on Twitter. And sometimes, people get a bit upset when you unfollow them on Instagram or Twitter. But, if you go to my Instagram, you'll see that I think I'm following under 100 people. And on Twitter as well, you can go through, and there's a specific reason, except for maybe, I don't know, 5 maybe meme pages on there. There's a specific reason I follow every single person on there too. So yeah, I can definitely resonate with all those points that you were talking about for sure. So guys, if someone wants to be acquired by you guys or follow you or be hired as things are coming up, where's the best place to get in touch with the CEO, Justin Kenna, or GameSquare?
Yeah, Kevin's information is on our website, gamesquare.com. His email's kevin@gamesquare.com. But I'm more than happy to take inbound directly, justin@gamesquare.com, where we're always looking at new opportunities and the best way to build out the business and also to bring in really quality people. So definitely open to hearing from people that may fit within those parameters for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks guys for coming on today, and yeah, I'm glad to get a lot of those questions answered. I'm going to be really interested to see who the next company is that comes in that wants to talk to me, who's building an esports ecosystem, because it's something I've been looking into for a long time and talking to a lot of people. So I'm excited to track your process and your progress. And like I said, I'm also really interested, not just for that fact, but also because of FaZe Clan alum, like we talked about at the start of the podcast. I think FaZe for many reasons are leading the industry, and sometimes they can do things better, and sometimes they do things much better than others. So I'm really interested to see how, more people may leave as they scale and change direction to do some things like you guys are doing as well.
For sure. Cool,
fantastic.
Man, thanks for having us. It's been good chatting.
No worries. So thanks for coming on, guys, and thanks everyone for listening in to the Big Esports Podcast or Big Gaming Live. As always, this is live on LinkedIn and Twitch. This is the first one of 2021, but now we've got a whole bunch more scheduled for you guys, so make sure you tune in. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye for now.